All right, so today I want to talk about this story out of the Western Standard, and it's Frank McVitie responding to it here on Twitter. And he says Alberta Union leader under fire for comparing UCP to Nazis. Again, now, the first thing I wanted to point out here is that it really just makes me laugh about how the left is like shocked and appalled, and like they just can't understand why people on the right have such disdain for unions and for them, basically, at least some of them. um, and they're so ignorant that they don't even realize that in the same breath they'll wonder why people have such disdain for them, but in the other breath they'll be like, they're Nazis. Like, again, like, how stupid can you people be? Like, I don't understand how you can be that ignorant. And the reality is that one of the main reasons why, I mean, there's a lot of aspects to it, but the main reason why the left calls people on the right Nazis, and again, unions are largely leftist organizations. Let's not pretend otherwise. Um, the reason why they call people Nazis and racist and all this kind of stuff is because, number one, they don't have a good argument against the arguments that the right puts forward usually, and number two, they know that the average person um, will hear someone being called a Nazi or a racist, or, obviously they're pretty much one and of the same, and they'll be like, "Oh, that person's terrible. I don't want anything to do with them," and they won't look any further into it. The problem is that they overuse that word, and that's their downfall. Is that they call everybody a racist who isn't on the left. You're calling people, like, literally again, there's white liberals calling black conservatives white nationalists. Again, like, that's where we're at. So eventually they will overuse the term. The problem is that they may gain power and keep it from here until eternity. Um, until then, so that's the big problem when it comes to that. But the other things too is that um, I don't understand. Like, there's such a double standard here in that there isn't really, I mean, a clear alternative or a clear, comparison for the other side, because hardly anyone, in fact, I've never even come close to meeting someone who is literally a Nazi, who literally believes in that kind of stuff. But I've met plenty of people, um, especially online, but even some in person, who are communists. Again, people say, "Oh, the far left is communist and the far right is the Nazis or the fascism." When in reality, fascism or the Nazis aren't far right. I mean, the Nazis. I mean, Nazi literally stands for National Socialist. So it's nationalism with socialism. So it's actually not really far right. Again, they like to have you believe that because, again, it's a smear tactic. And regardless of whether or not you think I'm right about that, you can't debate the fact that if someone calls people or calls a group of people names rather than addressing their argument, they are confessing that they don't have a better argument than that person. Because if you did, you would just make that argument. Because someone looking at it from the outside, again, whenever I'm looking at a topic where I don't really know what I'm talking about, and I see different groups of people debating, or even a topic I maybe I know a little bit about, but not as much as the average person within the whatever industry or group it is. Whenever I see someone calling someone else names, or using that kind of childish, teenage girl kind of clicky, gossip garbage that goes on. At least nowadays, that's pretty much everyone does that kind of stuff. Um, I immediately assume that whatever position there is wrong, because if they had a better argument, they would make the better argument. And this is the other thing too. That the other reason that that the left has no idea what they're talking about or doing is that um, if they actually understood the right, they understand that for 90% of people on the right, maybe even more, especially the laymen, the politicians, I think it's a little bit different. I think it's like 50-50. But for 90% of everyday right, even right leaning supporters, the minute you call them a racist, it doesn't mean anything. Like, it doesn't mean anything. And not only that, too, I would say there's a very large percent of that population, too, that view it as a badge of honor to be called a racist. Now, again, that could be taken completely out of context, but what I mean by that is that um, the old saying goes is that, okay, well, um, Why do liberals call you racist? Because they can't defeat your argument. Like, that's the saying that pretty much everybody on the right has heard and everyone on the right knows. So again, if the left actually understood the right and was actually genuinely interested in changing people's minds, they wouldn't call people racist. Like, they wouldn't do it, because anybody who's not on the left knows that the minute that someone on the left accuses someone of being a racist, like, instantaneously, it is a confession of not being able to debunk or to beat or to make a better argument than what they're making. They don't have a better argument, but they're too proud to admit they're wrong, so they just call people racist. And again, this is exactly what they're doing. And the other aspect of that I want to point out too is that, um, for all these leftists in Alberta, like, I've mentioned it before, but I really don't get it. Like, why do you stay? Like, I don't understand. Like, why do they stay? And again, it's like the best Wexit argument I think that pretty much exists is at least the one to convince people who aren't apt to believe it in the first place. I think the people that are more apt to believe it in the first place, there's other arguments that are definitely better. But for people who are in the middle or on the left, the best argument you can make for Wexit, is, okay, if Wexit is so bad, you can just leave the rest of You could go move you could move to most of BC, you could move to Ontario, you could move to Quebec, you could move to the Maritimes. There's plenty of areas where you can move to. And if the leftist way of running things works better, then great. You're in a much better spot. But they don't want to do that because everybody knows in the back of their head, even the socialists, even the leftists, that their policies don't work. The only way that, I mean, socialism will never work in the long run. Like, it will never work in the long run. The only way that it can work in the short run is if you have a small group of people who pay disproportionately a lot higher into the system than they put out. And that is basically Alberta in a nutshell. Not as much anymore, but Alberta has always been the province that has put way more into Canada than they've got out. And that's the only way that socialism can succeed, because the problem is, under socialism, there's a massive incentive for people not to work and not to produce, because you get paid either way. Why would you produce if you get paid? Um, and that's one of the many reasons that socialism won't work. But getting back to the main point here is that, um, if 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 the leftist or the socialist way of doing things work, then every leftist, especially the ones that don't live in Alberta or Saskatchewan, should be for Wexit. Because if, let's just say hypothetically, Alberta and Saskatchewan left Canada and created their own country tomorrow, then Canada would have an overwhelming majority to the left. The elections in Canada would come down to the socialists and the kind of where, I mean, where the liberals are. I mean, the liberals right now are pretty much socialist, but I'm talking like full on hardcore socialist, borderline communists, versus someone kind of where the liberals are at right now. But even though the liberals are pretty far left. So if you actually believed in these leftist policies, then you would be fully on board Wexit, because that's what, probably 80% of the conservative support from Canada is in these two provinces. I mean, there's a little bit in Manitoba, a little bit in Ontario, but other than that, conservative support is literally non-existent. So again, if Alberta and Saskatchewan left Canada, conservatives would be lucky to be the third. They'd probably end up being fourth. I bet you the Greens might even beat, or the Bloc would. The Bloc would. It would be, I mean, the NDP would probably take the position of the socialists, which a lot of people kind of think they are already, which kind of is true, but they would go full on socialism. And I mean like a step away from being communist. The liberals would stay pretty much where they're at, which is pretty far left, definitely further to the far left than to the center, but not by that much. And then there would be the Bloc, and then fourth place would come down to probably the Conservatives or the Greens. Like, literally, like, for all these leftists out there, uh, if you actually believe in your political beliefs so much, why don't you support Wexit? Why don't you support it? Because if it happened, like I said, conservatives would never get voted in again. And not only that, I don't even think they would get second place ever again. And this is just why you know that the left doesn't actually believe in what they believe. The reason that they believe what they believe is, number one, they're lied to in public schools and universities and the mainstream media. And number two, a lot of these people are just people who want to exploit the system. Again, most of the criticisms of the right that the left has is largely just projections of what they're doing, right? Like they accuse the right of being racist, but yet they turn around and support, quotas for hiring people based off race, which is by definition racist. Again, they support reparations, which again is pretty much racist because again, no one alive today was a slave, and no one alive today was a slave owner. Again, so that's another thing, and they like I say, they always project. They always project. Again, they claim we're anti-sexist, even though we support hiring people just based off the fact that they're a woman. We don't care if they're grossly underqualified. We want to hire them anyway. So again, that's what people on the right really need to understand better too, is that most of these accusations and criticisms the left has is just a projection. It's just a projection. Again, there you have all these leftists that are all up in arms about the spending, in Alberta, and like, what are you talking about? Like the NDP ran up way more debt. The NDP ran up. I mean, they inherited about 10 billion in debt when they left. They were about 50 billion in debt. So again, they racked up more debt. They racked up more debt in the average year than the Conservatives did over the 50-year period or whatever it was that they were in power. So again, it's just projection. Like it's just projection. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. So if you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. Again, I appreciate any donations. At the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And then last few things, check me out on Twitter, BitChute, and Parlay if you haven't already. Make sure to check me out on those other platforms as well.